Hello, I'm Thomas Rhodey, Archbishop of Mobile. This four-part series on the Mass is a simple, but I hope rich presentation of some of the aspects of the Mass. Even though we may have been celebrating the Mass for a number of years, there are parts of the Mass that perhaps we don't understand where they came from or why we do them. This presentation will not be exhaustive. It will not go into many parts of the Mass that we could talk about. For example, it will not go into the deep Jewish roots of the Mass. Remember, Jesus, in celebrating the Last Supper, the first Mass, was celebrating a Jewish meal. But I hope, as brief as this four-part presentation will be, will still whet our appetite to know more about the Mass and come to a deeper appreciation of the Mass for the priceless gift it is that the Mass is truly God offering His love to us.
My earliest childhood memories of the Mass involve one or two things. One, curled up under the pews dreaming about where my family might eat lunch after Mass. And two, scraping off the lacquer of the wood pew in front of me, rolling into a ball and flicking it on the people in front of me. Obviously, something between then and now has changed. And I have to ask myself, and I invite you to ask, has something drastically changed about the nature of the Mass since I was a kid? Or perhaps have I changed my understanding of what it is to me and to others? And I ask you to consider in this series, what is the Mass? If it is what the Church says it is, it's the most important thing that happens on the face of the earth. It's the most intense and personal way to encounter the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And to wrap our minds around this whole thing, we have to start with a very basic question. Why worship at all? In a place like this, with other people, when there's so many other things in your life that you could be doing.
In discussing the Mass, the first question which logically would arise is, why do we gather to worship God? And perhaps the easiest answer, the most accurate answer, is to say because God commanded it. Before God commanded us not to kill, not to steal, not to commit adultery, not to lie. He commanded us, you will worship me. Remember, keep holy the Sabbath. And why would God, in His love and wisdom, command us to worship Him? Because God knows us better than we know ourselves, and He knows that if we would forget to worship God, little by little, we would forget who He is. And if we forget who God is, we will forget who we are. It is by worshiping God that we remember that we're created for a reason. We're created to know, love, and serve God in this world and be with God forever in the next. There's a reason why we exist. And we're not just created for the here and now, we're created for eternity. We're created to enter into a relationship with God that begins now and lasts into all of eternity.
So I always grew up going to Mass. My mom was Catholic, my dad was not, but they got married and my dad was, he wanted to raise us in the church, and so he, we went to Catholic school my whole life, and I went to Mass every Sunday. So it just was always something that I did. I don't think I understood why I believed what I did.
How my family observed Sunday had an enormous impact on my life. It made me very aware that the Lord's Day was set apart. It was not to be lived as a Saturday or a Friday or Thursday, but that it was the Lord's Day and that it was to be a day of worship and of rest and of restoration.
I hate getting in trouble more than anything in the entire world. And so I didn't want to do any bad things. So church was good. So I just went to church because it was a good thing to do. I don't think it really, I don't know, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed like retreats and, mission trips and that kind of thing, but it wasn't, it wasn't as big a part of my life, I guess, as it is now.
I know that some people, a lot of people, do not go to church on Sunday. We live in a time that has changed from what I like to refer to as a Sabbath mentality to a weekend mentality. It used to be 100 years ago that most Americans worked a 6-day week, but the seventh day was meant for the worship of God. In our Christian culture, Sunday was the day that work ceased so that we could go to church. Today, most Americans work a 5-day week. We have now a weekend. And it's interesting, even though we work less hours now, we have less church attendance than we used to, because we've evolved little by little from a mentality that the Sabbath was a time to worship God to the weekend is my time. It's my time to relax, to refresh myself. Why? Because I've been working all week. That's the attitude of our culture. And I have some downtime. Why? Because we must go back to work on Monday. And so this becomes our time instead of a time to worship God. And the danger with that is that we begin to look upon ourselves as being created only to work. Because we've worked for 5 days, we now take time off, so we refresh ourselves to go back to work on Monday. Instead of remembering who we really are, that we are not meant just to work, but to enter a relationship with God.
I have the greatest respect and gratitude that I had a father whose faith was so deep and whose experience of the Lord's Day was so sacred that he wanted and demanded that his son comply with what Sunday was all about. And so it deeply impressed me, so much to the point that I remember when Sunday became less and less a holy day in our nation, that it was disturbing to me. And it didn't seem to disturb other people in my generation, but it did disturb me that Sunday was changing before my very eyes, that it was becoming just another day.
So then in college, I was still trying to figure out who I was. I went to a school where I knew one person out of 26,000. And as a very shy person, it was very hard. And so I was trying to figure out still who I was and what I wanted to be. And so I kind of, did the whole college thing for a little bit. And then I just realized that wasn't who I was. I wasn't happy. I didn't feel comfortable with those things that I was doing, and I wanted to get back on the right track. And so me and my 2 Catholic friends would go to Mass and then go to the Baptist church on Sundays. It wasn't every Sunday, but we just kind of wanted to, just part of it. All of our friends were there, so we wanted to hang out. All of the cool, normal Christian guys were Baptist, but there was just always something missing with that, and I just never felt like it was church. Like I never left there feeling like I had gone to church. So, that was why we always, even if we went to the Baptist church, we'd always go to Mass too, because that's where, Jesus is there. It's where, it felt more like home, and it felt more like I don't know, where we were supposed to be.
Years ago, if a farmer had a mule, he'd work the mule. But every so often he'd let the mule relax. Why? Not because the mule had any dignity, but just so he could get more work out of that mule. And God says to us, you will worship me, because if you forget to worship me, you will forget eventually who I am. And when you forget who I am, you will forget who you are. God says to us, you are not just a beast of burden. You are not created just to work. There's a reason why you exist. You are created to be my son, my daughter.
I did attend Mass as a Protestant, but very, very rarely. But after having been invited by some friends of the Men of St. Joseph to go to Mass, I did, and I found in the Mass something that I had been looking for a long, long time. And I didn't even realize I was looking for it. On one level, I didn't realize it. On another level, I was very conscious that something was missing in my life.
When I was kind of veering off of the path, I didn't feel like myself. Like, I just felt like I was doing something wrong, because I was. But it just wasn't, like, it wasn't truly me at all. And it wasn't until I went back and got more involved in the church that I felt like I was really being myself and not putting on this front to try to make people like me.
The Lord's Day was to be taken very seriously, and that we were to rest on the Lord's Day. We were to do quiet things. And when I was a teenager, and I loved to play tennis, and there was a tennis match on Sunday afternoon that I wanted to be a part of, and my father very calmly but sternly said, "No, Norman, you cannot do that." And oh my goodness, I just could hardly believe my ears, but in another sense I knew that's what he was going to say. And it was, but it was a defining moment for a teenager to know that no, he could not participate in this tennis match. And here I am all these decades later remembering it and telling you about it.
You know, sometimes we look at a beautiful sunrise or sunset, majestic mountains, a rainbow, and we might stand in awe of this beauty. But God is not awed by mountains or rainbows or sunrises, sunsets. But God, when God looks at us, is awed because he sees himself. As Scripture says, we are created in the image and likeness of God. And God looks at us and can't stop loving us because, as the Bible says, God is love. And God looks at us and sees himself, sees his image. And the way that love works, it wants to be returned. Even we human beings, with all our faults and failings and sins, know that when we love someone, we want them to love us back. And how much more that is true with pure love, divine love, that wants to be returned. And God says to us, you are not a beast of burden. You are my son, my daughter. I have given you that dignity. And you will worship me so that you don't forget who you are.
So what if I told you that you could be transported in time to be a first-hand witness of the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ? What if I told you that you could literally hold God in your hand, put him in your mouth, and receive him into your body and soul? What if I told you that any time of any day that you wanted to sit in the same room as Jesus Christ, to talk to him, let his presence wash over you, that you could do that? What I'm telling you is that all of that and more is possible because of the Mass and the Eucharist. I want to invite you to enter more deeply into this great mystery, the greatest gift that God's given the human race, the greatest gift that the Catholic Church has preserved for 2,000 years. I invite you to enter more deeply into that today and every day of your life, where you will encounter Christ, who will bring you great peace and great joy.